How did my daughter's sleepover end with FBI at my door? The FBI agent showed me a photograph of my daughter's bedroom, and my hands started shaking before I even understood what I was looking at. It was taken from outside our house through her second-floor window, time-stamped 11:43 p.m. the night before. In the image, 3 12-year-old girls sat cross-legged on sleeping bags, illuminated by laptop light, completely unaware they were being watched. "Mrs. Reeves," the agent said, her voice professionally neutral, "we need to talk about what your daughter and her friends were doing online last night." I looked past her to the 3 black SUVs parked in my driveway, to the neighbors gathering on their lawns with phones raised, and I realized that whatever I thought I knew about my child's innocent sleepover was about to be destroyed by the truth. My name is Diana Reeves, and until yesterday morning, I believed I was a good mother who paid attention. I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, which meant I was always present, always available, always aware of what my daughter Lucia was doing. Or so I thought. Lucia was my only child, born after years of fertility struggles, and I'd built my entire life around making sure she grew up safe and loved and protected from all the darkness I'd experienced in my own chaotic childhood. I monitored her screen time, knew all her friends' parents, checked her homework every night, and made sure she understood internet safety. When she asked to have her 3 best friends over for a sleepover to celebrate finishing their middle school finals, I'd said yes immediately. It seemed wholesome, normal, exactly the kind of childhood memory I wanted her to have. The girls arrived Friday evening around 6. A parade of sleeping bags and overnight cases and excited chatter. There was Lucia's best friend Maren, a quiet girl with dark braids who'd been in her class since kindergarten. Then came Sophie, the math whiz whose mother was a lawyer and whose father taught at the university. Last was Ivy, the new girl who'd transferred mid-year from California and had quickly become part of their inseparable group. I made them pizza, set out snacks, and gave them the usual rules. Stay in Lucia's room, keep the noise down after 10, no leaving the house. They promised with the earnest enthusiasm of kids who had no intention of breaking rules because they were too busy having fun. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have a daughter with such good friends, such normal preteen concerns. By midnight, their giggles had quieted to whispers, and I went to bed feeling like I'd successfully supervised a perfect sleepover. Saturday morning, I woke to find all 4 girls already up, huddled around Lucia's laptop at the kitchen table. They looked exhausted, eyes red-rimmed, and they barely touched the pancakes I made. "Did you guys stay up all night?" I asked, trying to sound amused rather than concerned. Lucia glanced at her friends before answering. "We were just talking. Lost track of time." The other girls nodded in unison, but something about their synchronized response felt rehearsed. I let it go because they were 12, and sleepovers meant being tired. And what was the harm in one night of lost sleep? The girls' parents picked them up by noon, and I spent the afternoon doing laundry and tidying up, finding nothing more suspicious than empty chip bags and several cans of energy drinks I didn't remember buying. Lucia went to her room and slept until dinner, which I attributed to exhaustion. When she came down to eat, she was quiet in a way that felt different from her usual introspective moods. "Everything okay?" I asked. She nodded without meeting my eyes. "Just tired." Sunday morning, the FBI arrived. I was still in my bathrobe, coffee cup in hand, when I saw the SUVs pull up. My first thought was that there'd been some mistake, that they had the wrong house, that this was something happening to someone else. Then I saw how many agents were emerging from the vehicles, saw the way they spread out to cover both front and back exits, and my stomach dropped. The doorbell rang with an authority that made my hands shake as I reached for it. Agent Keiko Tanaka showed me her badge through the glass, her expression professionally blank, and asked if she could come in. I let her in because what else could I do? And within seconds my home was filled with federal agents who moved through rooms with the efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. "Where is Lucia?" Agent Tanaka asked. I pointed upstairs, my voice failing me. 2 agents went up and I heard my daughter's door open, heard her confused voice asking what was happening. They brought Lucia downstairs in her pajamas, her face pale and confused and terrified in a way that made me want to throw myself between her and whatever was happening. Agent Tanaka asked her to sit on the couch, asked me to sit beside her, and then pulled up a chair facing us like we were about to have a conversation instead of the destruction of everything I thought I knew. "Lucia," she said gently, "we need to talk about the website you and your friends accessed last night, about the forum you've been participating in for the past 3 months." My daughter's face went from confused to horrified, and I watched her transform from a child into someone with secrets in the space between heartbeats. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered, but her eyes told a different story. Agent Tanaka opened a laptop and turned it toward us. On the screen was a dark web forum, and even reading the abbreviated thread titles made me feel sick. "This account belongs to you," Tanaka said, pointing to a username I didn't recognize. "We've been monitoring this forum for 6 months as part of an investigation into," she paused, glancing at me, "into criminal activity involving minors." I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I was hearing. My daughter, my careful, intelligent, well-supervised daughter, had somehow accessed the dark web and gotten involved in something that brought the FBI to our door. "What kind of criminal activity?" I managed to ask, though part of me didn't want to know. Agent Tanaka's expression shifted slightly, showing something that might have been sympathy. We're still determining Lucia's level of involvement. What we know is that her account, along with 3 others we've identified as belonging to her friends, has been active on this forum for 12 weeks. The forum facilitates communication between minors and adults for purposes that violate multiple federal laws. The implications settled over me like ice water. Are you saying my daughter was talking to predators? Tanaka shook her head. I'm saying we need to understand what she was doing on this forum and why, because from what we've observed, the 4 girls weren't victims of solicitation. They were active participants in something much more complicated. Lucia started crying, silent tears that tracked down her face without sound. I reached for her, but she pulled away, and that rejection hurt worse than anything the agent had said. Lucia, what did you do? My voice came out harsher than I intended, sharp with fear and confusion. She shook her head, pressing her lips together like she was physically holding words inside. Agent Tanaka leaned forward. Lucia, I need you to understand something. We've arrested 4 adults this morning based on information gathered from that forum, but we've also identified 12 minor accounts that were posting content and engaging in activities that cross legal lines. You're one of those 12. How much trouble you're in depends entirely on what you tell us right now about your involvement. My daughter looked at me then, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not just fear, but calculation, like she was weighing what to reveal and what to keep hidden. That look terrified me more than anything else because it meant she'd been living a secret life complex enough to require strategic thinking. I want a lawyer, Lucia said, her voice small but steady. Agent Tanaka nodded like she'd expected this. That's your right, but I need you to know that 3 of your friends are being questioned right now, and the first one to cooperate fully will have significant advantages when it comes to prosecution decisions. Prosecution? The word hung in the air like a threat. My 12-year-old daughter might be prosecuted for something I still didn't fully understand. She's a child, I said, hearing hysteria creep into my voice. Whatever she did, she's a child. Tanaka's expression hardened slightly. Mrs. Reeves, children can commit crimes, and depending on the nature and severity, they can be held accountable. What we need to determine is whether Lucia was coerced, manipulated, or acting with full knowledge of what she was doing. She turned back to my daughter. Were the adults on that forum forcing you to do anything? Threatening you? Blackmailing you? Lucia shook her head. Then what were you doing there? Silence. My daughter stared at her hands, tears still falling, saying nothing. Yeah, Agent Tanaka stood and gestured for me to follow her into the kitchen, leaving another agent to sit with Lucia. In the privacy of my own kitchen, surrounded by the breakfast dishes I hadn't yet cleaned, she showed me what they'd found. Screenshots of forum posts made by Lucia's account over the past 3 months, detailing conversations that made me want to vomit. My daughter and her friends had been posing as adults, using fake profiles with stolen photos, engaging with actual predators, and leading them into increasingly explicit conversations. But they weren't victims being groomed. They were the ones doing the grooming, pretending to be interested, gathering information, and then doing something I couldn't initially comprehend. They were catfishing pedophiles, Agent Tanaka explained, creating fake personas, engaging these men in conversations, getting them to reveal identifying information, and then exposing them publicly. They maintained a separate social media account where they'd post screenshots of conversations along with the men's real names, photos, workplaces, everything they could find. I stared at the evidence, my brain refusing to process it. They were trying to catch predators? It sounded insane. They thought they were helping, Tanaka said, playing vigilante. But what they actually did was compromise multiple ongoing FBI investigations, potentially alerting dangerous individuals that they were being monitored, and in several cases, engaging in behavior that constitutes manufacturing explicit content involving minors. She showed me another screenshot, this one showing a conversation where someone using Lucia's account had sent photos. The images were censored in the version she showed me, but the implication was clear. Those aren't pictures of Lucia, I said immediately. She wouldn't, but Tanaka was already nodding. You're right. The images were digitally created, AI-generated fake photos designed to look like underage girls, which means your daughter and her friends were creating and distributing what legally qualifies as child sexual abuse material, even though no real child was photographed. The room spun. This couldn't be real. My daughter couldn't have done this. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Why would they do this? Agent Tanaka closed the laptop. That's what we're trying to understand. Our current theory is that they saw themselves as heroes, protecting other kids from predators. There are several high-profile online groups that do this kind of thing. Adult vigilantes who stream confrontations with suspected predators. The girls might have thought they were doing the same thing, not understanding the legal and ethical complexities. She paused. Or one of them understood perfectly well and convinced the others to participate. That's what we need to determine. I thought about the 4 girls sitting around my kitchen table yesterday morning, exhausted and secretive and united in whatever they'd done. You think one of them was the ringleader? Tanaka's expression was carefully neutral. In these situations, there's usually one dominant personality driving the behavior. The others go along because of friendship, peer pressure, or genuine belief in the cause. We need to figure out which girl that is. I went back to the living room where Lucia sat hunched over her knees, still crying silently. I sat beside her and took her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. Lucia, I need you to tell me everything. Start at the beginning. She looked at me with eyes that seemed older than they should be, aged by whatever she'd experienced in the past 3 months. Mom, we were trying to help. There are so many bad people online, so many men who hurt kids, and nobody was doing anything about it. Her voice gained strength as she spoke, conviction breaking through fear. We saw this group online that catches predators and reports them to the police, and we thought, why can't we do that? Why can't we help? I squeezed her hand. So you created fake profiles? She nodded. Ivy knew how to access the dark web. Her brother showed her before he went to college. And Sophie found the forum where these men talked to each other about, she choked on the words, about hurting kids. We pretended to be adults who were interested, and they believed us, and they told us everything. And then what? I needed to understand the full scope. Lucia wiped her eyes with her free hand. Then we'd research them, find out their real names from details they shared. Sophie's really good at that kind of thing, like detective work. Once we knew who they were, we'd expose them on social media, post everything they'd said, tag their employers, make sure people knew what they were. She looked at me with something like defiance. We got 3 men fired, Mom. 3 predators lost their jobs because we exposed them. That's 3 fewer men who might hurt someone. The logic was childish and terrifying, and I could see how they'd convinced themselves this was righteous. But Lucia, you created fake photos. You pretended to be underage girls and sent those images to these men. Do you understand what that means legally? Her face crumpled. We didn't think it was real child porn because it wasn't real children. It was just AI, just pixels. We never hurt anyone real. Agent Tanaka, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. That's where you're wrong. The law doesn't distinguish between real photographs and realistic digital creations when it comes to this specific content. If an image depicts a minor in a sexual context, it's illegal regardless of how it was created. You and your friends manufactured and distributed child sexual abuse material. That's a federal crime with mandatory minimum sentences. Lucia's defiance collapsed into pure terror. I didn't know. We didn't know. We thought we were just making fake bait to catch bad guys. I pulled her against me and she buried her face in my shoulder. Over her head, I met Tanaka's eyes. What happens now? The agent sat down across from us. That depends. We need to know who initiated this operation, who had the technical knowledge to access the dark web, create the AI images, and set up the social media accounts. We need to understand the full structure of what you girls created. She focused on Lucia. If you cooperate completely and help us understand the hierarchy of your group, that will be taken into account. Lucia pulled away from me, wiping her face with both hands. We all did it together. It was all of us equally. But her voice wavered, and Agent Tanaka caught it immediately. Lucia, I've interviewed enough kids to know when someone's protecting their friends. This level of technical sophistication doesn't come from 4 12-year-olds working together spontaneously. Someone led this operation. She pulled out her phone and showed us a photo. It was a screenshot of a group chat from an app I'd never heard of. We recovered this from Sophie's phone. The messages show a clear pattern. One person gives instructions, the others follow. One person makes decisions about targets, timing, and strategy. That person isn't you. Is it Lucia? My daughter shook her head slowly. Then who? Tanaka asked gently. Lucia looked at me with an expression that begged for protection I couldn't provide. Ivy, she whispered. It was Ivy's idea. All of it. The revelation shifted everything. Agent Tanaka made several phone calls, speaking in low tones about adjusting interview strategies and checking backgrounds. I held Lucia on the couch, both of us numb with shock and fear, while other agents continued searching her room. They found her laptop, her phone, a tablet I didn't know she had hidden in her closet. Everything would be forensically examined, every message and search recovered. My daughter's digital life was being dissected by strangers, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Tell me about Ivy, I said quietly. Lucia leaned against me, exhausted. She transferred to our school in January. She seemed cool, like she knew about everything we didn't. She'd lived in 3 different states, been to concerts we'd only heard about, had an older brother who taught her about computers and the internet. We wanted to be like her. It was the classic story of a more worldly kid influencing sheltered ones. When did she suggest the predator catching? Lucia's voice was almost inaudible. Second week she was at school. She told us about this group online that does it, showed us videos, said it was important work that anyone could do if they were brave enough. And you all wanted to be brave, I said, understanding how easily children could be manipulated by the right combination of heroism and adventure. Lucia nodded against my shoulder. She made it sound like we'd be protecting kids who couldn't protect themselves, like we'd be heroes. Her voice broke. I thought I was doing something good, Mom. I really did. I kissed the top of her head, my own tears finally starting. I know, baby, I know. But good intentions didn't change the legal reality we were facing. Agent Tanaka returned with information that made my blood run cold. We've been trying to locate Ivy's parents for the past hour. The address listed with your school is fake. The phone number disconnects. The references they provided when they enrolled her were fabricated. She looked at me with an expression that suggested this situation was far worse than I'd imagined. Mrs. Reeves, there is no 12-year-old girl named Ivy Bennett from California. The person your daughter has been friends with for the past 4 months doesn't exist. The world tilted. What do you mean she doesn't exist? She goes to school with Lucia. She was in my house last night. Agent Tanaka pulled out another photo. This one a school ID picture showing the girl I'd met, the girl who'd eaten pizza at my table and slept on my daughter's floor. This person enrolled in your school using forged documents. We're running facial recognition now, but preliminary investigation suggests she's significantly older than 12, possibly late teens or early 20s. I couldn't process it. Couldn't reconcile the child I'd seen with an adult posing as one. But she looks 12, I protested weakly. Tanaka's expression was grim. Some people can pass for younger than they are. And with the right clothing, mannerisms, and environment, it's easier than you'd think, especially when adults aren't looking for deception from someone in a middle school setting. She turned to Lucia. Has Ivy ever done anything that seemed strange for someone your age? Said things that suggested she had more experience or knowledge than expected? Lucia sat up, her face pale. She knew things, like adult things. She'd mentioned movies we weren't allowed to watch but described them perfectly. She knew about politics and news stories in detail. She had opinions about things we'd never thought about. The memories were clearly replaying differently now with new context. And she always had money, like lots of it. She'd buy lunch for all of us every day, say her parents gave her a credit card because they were never around. I thought about the energy drinks I'd found, the ones I didn't remember buying. Did Ivy bring those drinks? Lucia nodded. She brought a lot of the food for the sleepover, said her mom had bought too much and she didn't want it to go to waste. Classic grooming behavior, I realized with horror. Win the children's trust with gifts and special treatment. What was she really doing? I asked Agent Tanaka. Why would an adult pretend to be 12 and infiltrate a middle school? That's what we're working to determine, Tanaka said carefully. But based on the forum activity and the sophistication of the operation your daughters ran, my guess is she was recruiting, building a network of children who would engage with predators, create content, and potentially advance to more direct involvement. She paused. The 4 adults we arrested this morning all had one thing in common. They'd been engaging with accounts they believed belonged to interested adults, but the conversations eventually led them to believe they were communicating with minors who were being made available by these adults. It's a trafficking recruitment pattern. The full horror crashed over me. She was training my daughter and her friends to be, I couldn't say it, Tanaka finished for me, to be familiar with the process, to be desensitized to explicit content in communication with predators, to see themselves as active participants rather than victims. It's a long-term grooming strategy we've seen in sophisticated trafficking operations. Lucia started shaking, her whole body trembling as she understood what had really been happening. She said we were heroes. She said we were protecting people. The betrayal in her voice was devastating. I showed her everything. My passwords, my social media, where I went online. She said it was so she could help keep me safe. I pulled her tight against me, rage building beneath the fear. An adult had infiltrated my daughter's life, had come into my home, had systematically manipulated 4 children into activities that could destroy their futures. Where is she now? I demanded. Agent Tanaka checked her phone. We have teams at the school and searching her listed address, but I suspect she's already gone. People this organized have exit strategies. She looked at both of us. Lucia, did Ivy ever mention other friends from other schools? Other groups she was part of? My daughter thought, then nodded slowly. She talked about kids she knew from her old schools. Said she was teaching them the same thing she was teaching us. Said someday we'd all meet up and coordinate our efforts. How many kids? Tanaka's intensity increased. Lucia's voice was small. She mentioned names from 3 different schools. Maybe 10 or 12 kids total? The agent immediately made more calls, relaying information about a potential multi-city grooming operation. I listened in numb horror as she described what my daughter had unknowingly revealed. An adult woman moving between schools, building cells of children engaged in illegal online activity, all under the guise of vigilante justice. It was elaborate and evil and had been happening right under my nose while I congratulated myself on being an attentive parent. Mrs. Reeves, another agent called from upstairs, we need you to see something. I left Lucia with Agent Tanaka and followed him to her bedroom. He stood by her closet, pointing to something I'd somehow never noticed. A small camera, no bigger than a button, attached to the wall facing her bed. This is professional-grade surveillance equipment, he said, and it's been here for at least 2 months based on the data we're pulling. The violation of that discovery made my knees weak. Someone had been watching my daughter sleep, change clothes, exist in the privacy of her own room. Ivy, I said, and it wasn't a question. The agent nodded. We found the same cameras in the other 3 girls' rooms, all installed within days of this Ivy person befriending them. The feeds were being recorded and uploaded to an encrypted server we're working to access. He showed me his tablet, displaying a file structure with hundreds of videos labeled with dates and times. She wasn't just grooming them for online activity, she was documenting them for other purposes. I had to sit down on Lucia's bed, the bed that had been under surveillance for months, and put my head between my knees to keep from passing out. This wasn't just about the dark web forum or catching predators or even the illegal images. This was about a predator who'd been systematically documenting and exploiting my child and her friends while making them believe they were the hunters. I went back downstairs on shaking legs and found Agent Tanaka talking quietly with Lucia. When she saw my face, she stood immediately. "You found the cameras." It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to speak. She turned to my daughter. "Lucia, did Ivy ever give you gifts? Anything she said you should keep in your room?" Lucia thought. "A clock. She gave all of us these digital clocks for our birthdays, said they were from this cool tech company her brother worked for. Mine's on my nightstand." The agent who'd shown me the camera appeared with an evidence bag containing the clock. Camera and microphone built into the face, activated by motion and sound. He looked at Lucia. "Everything you did or said in that room was being recorded." My daughter's face went blank with shock. She heard me talking to my mom. She heard me talking to myself. She heard... The implications were endless and violating and traumatizing. I pulled her against me again, and this time she clung like a little child afraid of the dark. Agent Tanaka received a call and stepped outside. Through the window, I could see her expression shift from professional attention to sharp focus. She spoke rapidly, gestured to other agents, and returned with news I hadn't expected. "We found her, or rather her identity. The woman calling herself Ivy Bennett is actually Miranda Wolf, 23 years old, with a record of cybercrimes and fraud in 2 states. She's been under investigation by multiple agencies but kept disappearing before we could build a prosecutable case. This infiltration of your school was her boldest operation yet." She pulled up a photo on her laptop, showing the same face but older, with makeup and adult styling that made the 12-year-old disguise seem impossible. "She's sophisticated, well-funded, and connected to a network of individuals who specialize in this kind of exploitation. We believe she's been doing this for at least 3 years, moving between cities and targeting middle-income families with tech-savvy kids." I stared at the photo. "Why these families specifically?" Tanaka's answer was pragmatic and chilling. "Because the children of middle-income families often have access to technology and privacy, but their parents are too busy working to monitor them constantly. And because these kids are old enough to understand instructions but young enough to be manipulated by someone who seems just slightly cooler and older." What happens to Lucia now? The question I'd been terrified to ask finally emerged. Agent Tanaka's expression softened slightly. "That depends on several factors. Her level of cooperation, her understanding of what she was doing, and whether we can establish that she was being manipulated rather than acting with criminal intent. The fact that she was being surveilled and groomed by an adult posing as a peer works in her favor." She paused. "But I won't lie to you. She created and distributed illegal content. That's a federal crime. The best outcome we can hope for is juvenile diversion, mandated counseling, and restricted internet access. The worst outcome is prosecution as a juvenile offender with potential registration requirements. Registration requirements? Sex offender registration, for my 12-year-old daughter who thought she was helping protect other children. That can't happen," I said, hearing hysteria return to my voice. "She's a victim here. She was manipulated by an adult who specifically targeted her." Tanaka nodded. "Which is why her cooperation is crucial. Help us build a case against Miranda Wolf and the network she's part of, and I'll advocate for leniency. But the other 3 girls are making the same calculations right now." Sophie's mother called my phone, her voice shaking with rage and fear. "What did your daughter get mine involved in?" She didn't wait for an answer. "The FBI is in my house. They're telling me Sophie created child pornography. They're saying she could be charged as a sex offender. She's 12 years old, Diana. She plays violin and does math competitions." How did this happen? I tried to explain about Ivy, about the manipulation, but she cut me off. "Your daughter brought that girl into their friend group. Your daughter hosted the sleepover where this all came together. You should have been supervising them better." She wasn't wrong, and her accusation landed like a physical blow. "I thought I was supervising them," I said weakly. "They were in my house, all night. I checked on them." Sophie's mother laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You checked on them while they were accessing the dark web and sending illegal images to pedophiles. Great supervision." She hung up before I could respond, and I knew that regardless of legal outcomes, the social consequences had already begun. Marin's father arrived at my door an hour later, bypassing the FBI agents to confront me directly. "Your home was supposed to be safe," he said, his voice low and controlled in a way that was more frightening than shouting. "We trusted you with our daughter, and now she's being questioned about federal crimes." I tried to apologize, to explain, but he held up his hand. "I don't want to hear it. I want to know how an adult woman spent months pretending to be 12 years old and nobody noticed. How she came to sleepovers and birthday parties and school events, and every parent, including you, just accepted that she was a child." He was right. I'd seen Ivy dozens of times, had conversations with her, driven her home once when the girls had a study group. She'd been small and fresh-faced and energetic in that distinctly preteen way, and I'd never questioned it. "She was convincing," I said, knowing how inadequate that sounded. "She was a predator," he corrected, "and she used your daughter as a way to access mine. I need you to understand that whatever happens legally, our daughter's friendship is over. Marin won't be seeing Lucia again." I closed the door after he left and leaned against it, feeling my life crumble. Agent Tanaka found me there 20 minutes later, still standing with my back to the door like it was the only thing holding me up. Mrs. Reeves, we need Lucia to walk us through the technical process of what they did. How they accessed the dark web, created the images, set up the social media accounts, every detail. I nodded numbly and called Lucia down. For the next 3 hours, my daughter described a digital operation that sounded impossibly sophisticated for children. Ivy had provided special software for accessing encrypted networks. She'd taught them to use virtual private networks and anonymous browsers. She'd shown them AI programs that could generate realistic images from text descriptions. She'd created templates for fake social media profiles and taught them how to research targets using public records and social media scraping. It was a masterclass in cybercrime, delivered to children under the guise of vigilante heroics. Did she ever suggest meeting any of the men you were talking to? Agent Tanaka asked. Lucia shook her head. She said that was too dangerous, that the whole point was to expose them without putting ourselves at risk. But there was hesitation in her voice. What is it? Tanaka pressed. There was one time, Lucia admitted reluctantly, about a month ago. She said there was this man who was really dangerous, and that just exposing him online wasn't enough. She wanted to set up a meeting, have someone confront him in person. But we all said no. We didn't want to actually meet any of them. Tanaka leaned forward. What happened when you said no? Lucia looked uncomfortable. Ivy got really angry, said we were cowards, that we weren't serious about protecting kids. She didn't talk to us for almost a week. Then she apologized and said she understood we needed to stay safe. The agent exchanged glances with her colleague. That's when the pattern changed, she said. That's when she started pushing you toward more explicit content and more extreme engagement. She was testing boundaries, seeing how far she could push you. By evening, the FBI had removed most of their equipment and personnel, leaving just Agent Tanaka and one other agent to continue the interview process. Lucia was exhausted, her voice hoarse from talking, her eyes empty with emotional overload. Tanaka finally called a break, allowing us to order dinner and try to process everything that had happened. We sat at the kitchen table with untouched Chinese food between us, neither of us able to eat. Am I going to jail? Lucia asked, her voice small and terrified. I wanted to promise her she wasn't, but I couldn't lie. I don't know, baby, but we're going to do everything we can to make sure the people who matter understand you were being manipulated. She pushed rice around her plate. Sophie and Marin aren't going to be my friends anymore, are they? I thought about the phone call and the visit from angry parents. Probably not, Lucia nodded, accepting this with the resignation of someone who'd already lost everything that mattered. I deserve it. I was stupid. You weren't stupid, I said firmly. You were trusting. There's a difference. But even as I said it, I wondered, how had I raised a daughter who was smart enough to navigate complex technology, but naive enough to be manipulated by an adult posing as a peer? Where had I failed in teaching her to question, to verify, to protect herself from exactly this kind of predation? Agent Tanaka returned with news that shifted the investigation again. We've located Miranda Wolf. Or rather, we've located where she was 3 hours ago. She withdrew the maximum cash from several ATMs across the city, suggesting she's preparing to disappear again. She showed us security footage of a young woman who looked nothing like the 12-year-old Ivy. She was taller without the slouching posture kids naturally adopted, her face harder without the softness of childhood expressions, her movements confident and adult. We've issued warrants and alerts, but she's done this before. She knows how to vanish. She looked at Lucia. Is there anything at all, that she said about where she might go? Any places she mentioned? Any details about her real life? Lucia thought hard, clearly wanting to help. She talked about her brother a lot, said he was in college studying computer science, that he taught her everything she knew about technology. Tanaka nodded. We're looking into that. The problem is we don't know if she even has a brother or if that was part of the cover story. Lucia continued. She mentioned a cabin once, said her family had a place in the mountains where they'd go when they needed to disconnect, described it like it was really remote, no internet or cell service. The agent made notes. Mountains where? Did she say which state? Lucia shook her head, frustrated. She was vague. Said it was better if we didn't know too much because then we couldn't accidentally tell anyone. Another manipulation tactic, I realized. Create mystery and exclusivity while actually maintaining operational security. Everything Ivy had done was calculated, from the friendship itself to the specific task she'd assigned each girl based on their individual talents and vulnerabilities. The doorbell rang at 9 p.m. and I opened it to find Ivy's supposed father standing there. Except it wasn't her father because Ivy didn't exist. The man was in his 40s, well-dressed, with eyes that scanned our entryway with professional assessment. Mrs. Reeves, I'm Detective Lyons with the Cybercrimes Unit. I've been tracking Miranda Wolf for 18 months, and I need to speak with your daughter. Agent Tanaka appeared immediately, her hand moving instinctively toward her weapon before recognizing him. They spoke in low voices while I stood frozen, trying to understand how many layers this investigation had. Detective Lyons finally turned to me. I'm sorry for the unannounced visit, but time is critical. Miranda has a pattern. When she thinks she's been compromised, she accelerates her timeline. We believe she's planning to make contact with the girls one more time, possibly tonight, to either secure their silence or... He didn't finish the sentence, but his expression completed the thought. To harm them how? I demanded, moving to stand between him and the stairs where Lucia had gone to her room. Detective Lyon's expression was grave. Miranda Wolf doesn't leave loose ends. In her previous operations, when she felt exposed, she either framed the children she'd been grooming or created situations where they were silenced. In one case, a 13-year-old boy she'd been working with was found dead, ruled a suicide, though we've never believed that conclusion. The world tilted again. You think she'd hurt Lucia? He nodded slowly. I think she spent 4 months building a relationship with your daughter and 3 other girls. She's invested significant time and resources. And now that relationship is being exposed, she's lost that investment. People like Miranda don't react well to loss. Agent Tanaka was already making calls, arranging protection details for all 4 girls. We need Lucia in protective custody, she said, at least until we locate Miranda. I wanted to argue, wanted to keep my daughter home where I could protect her, but I knew that was irrational. I couldn't protect her from this. Lucia came downstairs with a backpack of clothes, her face pale, but accepting. How long will I be gone? She asked. Agent Tanaka's answer was honest. Until we find Miranda and eliminate the threat. Could be days, could be weeks. We drove to a federal facility I didn't know existed, a safe house for witnesses and at-risk individuals who needed protection. The building was unmarked, surrounded by fencing and security that made it look more like a prison than a refuge. Inside, a woman who introduced herself only as Carol showed us to a small apartment with a bedroom, bathroom, and living area. You'll both stay here, she explained to Lucia and me. No outside contact except through Agent Tanaka. No internet access, no phone calls, no visitors. Food will be delivered 3 times daily. There's a guard outside at all times. It was protective custody that felt like incarceration, and I watched my daughter take in the space with the same hollow expression she'd worn all day. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed with Lucia curled against me like she hadn't done since she was small, I finally let myself cry. Silent tears that soaked the pillow while my daughter slept fitfully, occasionally jerking awake with small sounds of distress. I'd failed her in ways I was still discovering. Failed to notice when an adult infiltrated her life. Failed to recognize the signs of grooming and manipulation. Failed to protect her from technology I didn't fully understand. Failed to create an environment where she felt safe telling me when something felt wrong. The weight of those failures pressed down until I could barely breathe. Outside, I could hear the guard's footsteps as he paced, protecting us from a threat that had been invited into our home with pizza and laughter and sleepovers that seemed innocent until they became crime scenes. 3 days passed in that safe house before Agent Tanaka arrived with news. They'd located Miranda Wolf attempting to cross into Canada using forged documents. She'd been arrested, was now in federal custody, and had immediately requested a lawyer. She's not talking, Tanaka said, but we don't need her to. We have enough evidence from the girl's testimony and the digital forensics to prosecute. What we need now is to understand the full scope of her network. She turned to Lucia. You mentioned she talked about other groups of kids in other cities. We need names, locations, anything you can remember. My daughter spent the next several hours with FBI sketch artists and geographic profilers, trying to recall every detail of Ivy's stories about her supposed friends from previous schools. It turned out Ivy had been remarkably consistent in her cover story, which meant the details she'd shared probably contained truth. They identified 3 other cities where children matching the ages and descriptions Lucia remembered had been reported for similar online activity. She's been doing this for years, Detective Lyons explained during a break, creating cells of children in different locations, each believing they're part of a small heroic group fighting predators. But the real purpose was always to create content and establish contact networks she could sell access to. He showed me documentation of a dark web marketplace where membership to private forums featuring real children could be purchased for thousands of dollars. Miranda was building a catalog. The videos from the cameras in your daughter's rooms, the chat logs from their conversations with predators, the AI-generated images they created, all of it had value in certain markets. She was manufacturing evidence of children engaged in illegal activity that she could then sell or use as blackmail. The scope of the evil was overwhelming. But the girls thought they were helping, I said weakly. Lyons nodded. That's what makes it so effective. The children participate willingly, even enthusiastically, because they believe they're on the side of justice. By the time they realize what they've actually been doing, they're too compromised to report it without incriminating themselves. We were allowed to return home after a week, though with continued security measures and strict monitoring. The house felt different, contaminated by knowledge of what had happened within its walls. I had professionals remove every piece of technology from Lucia's room, checked every corner for additional surveillance, and still felt like we were being watched. Lucia struggled to adjust to normal life. She couldn't return to school because the other students had learned why the FBI had been involved, and the gossip had metastasized into wild rumors about what she'd done. Parents called the school demanding she be expelled. Former friends posted speculation online. The girl who'd thought she was a hero had become infamous for the wrong reasons. I enrolled her in online school, arranged for therapy 3 times a week, and watched her withdraw into a shell of silence that reminded me too much of the aftermath of assault, because that's essentially what it was. Miranda Wolf had assaulted my daughter's sense of self, her judgment, her ability to trust. The legal proceedings stretched across months. Miranda Wolf was charged with multiple counts of exploitation, fraud, distribution of illegal content, and conspiracy. The 4 girls she'd groomed, including Lucia, were initially charged as well, but the prosecutor eventually agreed to diversion programs given the circumstances of manipulation by an adult. They would undergo counseling, perform community service, and maintain restricted internet access until they turned 18. No registration requirements, which felt like the only victory in an ocean of trauma. But the community wasn't as forgiving as the legal system. Sophie's family moved to another state within 3 months. Erin's parents pulled her from public school entirely, enrolling her in a private academy that accepted her despite the scandal. Ivy's parents, who'd never been found or identified, disappeared from all records as if they'd never existed. And my daughter carried the weight of having been fooled, having participated in federal crimes, having been surveilled and documented and used in ways that would haunt her for years. The trial of Miranda Wolf became a media sensation. Details emerged of a sophisticated operation spanning 5 years and 7 cities, involving dozens of children who'd believed they were vigilantes when they were actually being groomed. Child psychologists testified about manipulation techniques. Tech experts explained the AI tools used to create illegal content. The mothers of 3 children who'd attempted suicide after their involvement was exposed spoke through tears about the lasting damage. Miranda sat through it all with an expression of bored indifference, occasionally smiling when particularly damaging evidence was presented, as if proud of her work. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before finding her guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 35 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. As they led her away, she looked directly at where I sat with Lucia and mouthed something that looked like, "Thank you." I pulled my daughter close and made sure she didn't see. 2 years later, Lucia still wakes from nightmares about being watched. She's 14 now, in high school under a new name in a different district where nobody knows what happened. She's cautious with friendships, suspicious of gifts, and has a complex relationship with technology that involves both fascination and fear. The therapist says she's progressing, processing the trauma in healthy ways, learning to forgive herself for being a child who was targeted by a professional predator. But there are still hard days when she asks why she wasn't smart enough to recognize what was happening, and I tell her the same thing every time. Miranda Wolf made a career of fooling people, and being fooled doesn't make you stupid, it makes you human. Sophie reached out last month, tentatively reconnecting after years of enforced separation. They message occasionally, 2 survivors of the same manipulation, building something new from the ruins of their former friendship. The FBI's investigation continues, uncovering new victims and new networks monthly, and Agent Tanaka calls periodically to update us on additional arrests stemming from the initial case. Lucia will carry these scars forever, but she's learning to live with them rather than being defined by them. And someday the question of how my daughter's sleepover ended with FBI at my door will be answered simply because a predator disguised herself as a child, and we failed to notice until it was almost too late. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.